Hey, Kentucky, this is Mary Jo Perino. Tonight, statistics show why many people in our state are so vulnerable to COVID-19. Local communities enact curfews for kids, and we look back to a time when kids were still learning in the classroom. All that and more is next on Hey, Kentucky. Welcome to Hey Kentucky alongside LEX 18 Sports Director Keith Farmer. I say alongside, but we are a good distance apart. So let's get started. As of this afternoon, the coronavirus in Kentucky had claimed a second life, a 64-year-old man in Louisville. Meanwhile, there are dozens of confirmed cases. And when you look at these statistics, you can see why state and local leaders have taken such drastic action to stem the pandemic. The Kaiser Family Foundation, a nonprofit that focuses on national health issues, found that Kentucky has the sixth highest share of residents nationwide who are high risk because of their age or chronic health condition. Nearly half of the adults in the Bluegrass meet that criteria. And while COVID-19 barely affects 80% of the people who contract it, the disease has dire consequences for the vulnerable, including diabetics and patients with heart disease or cancer. And Keith, we throw out these lists all the time, and Kentucky is always one of the highest in obesity, smoking rates, heart disease, diabetes. Those are all underlying conditions that can be deadly should you contract the virus.
And I think people don't think about the fact that it's not just the fact we're saying leave the older generation inside. It's the fact that the younger generation can get it, as you said, may not have a lot of conditions, and then they go around one of the older generation people, and that's where you can have your problems. So do your part.
Yeah, that's just what we all keep saying, but our part is kind of tough.
Yeah.
All right, amid the COVID-19 pandemic, there's a kernel of hope for treating the illness. A UK professor says there's some promise following reports that many patients in Europe are responding well to a drug called chloroquine or hydrochloroquine. These are antiviral medications dating back to the 1940s, which are used to prevent and treat malaria and certain arthritic conditions. They are not approved for treating the coronavirus and are being prescribed off-label. So doctors can't claim they cure or even ease the symptoms of the virus. Meanwhile, a Lexington doctor is now the first in town to offer drive-up testing for COVID-19. The service began this morning in the parking lot of Bluegrass Extended Care Medicine on Governor's Lane, performing dozens of tests by mid-afternoon. It's welcome news for people like Fatima Warren, who spent a week trying to convince doctors to test her before she came up positive. Thankfully, Warren decided to self-isolate because she worried about infecting her 87-year-old grandmother.
One way or the other, if I'm positive, like just God, I want my grandmother to be healthy, at the end of the day. So they didn't even take that into consideration.
And Keith, that's what kind of sometimes worries me about the testing that we're doing is it's hard to get it. It's hard to get it. And a lot of people have said, I'm not experiencing symptoms, but they tested positive. We've seen that with a lot of NBA players. Of course, they can get the test.
Correct. And so you've been around somebody, you may not show the symptoms. And so it's good not only to have the testing, but it also takes a little bit of time for that test to return. That's something else that we found out. And so you want to have it early enough so that you know in plenty of time not to go around somebody else.
Sure, that's the second death in Kentucky. He died before his test results came back. That's tough.
Exactly.
That's tough. Local communities are taking the step to prevent juveniles from potentially spreading the virus. The Shelby County Judge Executive has declared a state of emergency and issued an executive order that implements a juvenile nighttime curfew. Today, Scott County's Judge Executive did the same thing, and others are considering it. Meanwhile, Governor Beshear is trying to quell rumors floating around the state about a National Guard lockdown. He says, quote, "That is not real, and that's fear. That's what fear does to us." While the National Guard is changing up its training plans this weekend in preparation for working with emergency officials, Beshear says if they were called into service, Guard members would be in charge of helping people, not enforcing the law. And Keith, you think of calling in the National Guard and you think of guns and armed tanks and all of that. That's not what this would be.
But we've seen them before being called in to help out too in times of hurricane situations, not here, but other places where they've helped out in situations. And again, that wasn't really necessarily a gun situation as much as it was helping people get out of their homes. So I would like to believe this is kind of much like what we talked about earlier this week with the sheriff that was keeping the gentleman in his home. It's not going to come to that yet. They're just going to help get things around to people. But if it comes to it, hopefully they're there just, watching in, making sure people are doing the right thing.
Yes, but also, providing supplies for people that can't get out or shouldn't get out. So it's a good thing. It could be a good thing.
Yes.
All right, in Frankfurt, the state legislature is taking a week-long break in response to the coronavirus as the Senate debated its version of the state's next 2-year spending plan yesterday. Senate President Robert Stivers and House Speaker David Osborne announced that lawmakers would adjourn at the end of the day and reconvene next Thursday. Under the plan, lawmakers would meet again on April 1st with the goal of passing the budget, then return a month later to take up any gubernatorial vetoes. The news came only one day after Representative Jim Gooch received applause from fellow Republicans after a House floor speech defending the legislature's decision to continue meeting, urging Kentuckians to continue living their lives as normal. And Keith, as much as we want to live our lives as normal and fight it, the comparison to 9/11 that he used, as far as unifying the country, I can see that, but it's not. It's just not the same thing.
No, this is, again, we've talked about it all week, how this is something that none of us have seen in our lifetimes. And the only thing that worries me is they're getting back on April 1st to try and do the budget.
Yeah, April Fools.
Yeah.
We got to have a little levity, don't we? All right, staying with politics, lawmakers have sent an amended bill requiring voters to present photo ID at the polls to the governor's desk. Right now, Kentucky voters have to show an ID to vote unless they are recognized by a poll worker. But Senate Bill 2 would require government-issued identification with the voter's photo. The ACLU criticizes the bill, saying it makes voting harder for those most vulnerable to the COVID-19 pandemic and forcing them to decide between risking exposure to other voters versus staying at home and not casting a ballot. Meanwhile, Secretary of State Michael Adams says he would consider allowing Kentuckians to mail in their ballots instead of having to show up to the polls in June. And Keith, I think that's reasonable. However, I will say that this ID thing came up way before coronavirus reared its ugly head. So that is not in response to that.
For sure, not at all. And the only thing that concerns me a little bit with, is mailing in the ballot. I don't know about you, but that kind of concerns me a little bit and how that could go wrong. I do like the fact that they're coming up with ideas instead of people standing in line to use, as in my polling place, one of two machines. So at least they are coming with ideas. How about something online I might feel better about? There are probably ways around it for hackers to get in there as well. I don't know what the right idea is on that.
I know. I'm not sure either, but I do take offense to them saying, oh, this is about the coronavirus and the impact, because it is not.
No.
All right, turning to sports. A UK football fan favorite is talking about the heartbreak that's come with cancellation season. Ever since the day he first put on a helmet, Cash Daniel had a dream to play on Sundays. That dream was close to becoming a reality as the linebacker finished his career with one of the best games of his career against Virginia Tech. And he felt like the now canceled pro day was the best shot to earn himself a spot on an NFL roster.
I didn't think my film was enough, for me to get drafted maybe, but, I worked really hard on, my 40 and flexibility and, the bench press and everything like that. So I was looking really forward to showcasing that in front of the scouts.
And Keith, let's be honest, his film is not enough probably to get him drafted. This hurts these guys that are on the fringe.
Yeah, but how much are the NFL teams maybe going to have to do a little more film work, maybe contact some coaches to find out who their best players were, since they couldn't even have a combine. So I do know they knew about those guys at the combine, but now, in his case, it definitely hurts him, no doubt about it. He wanted these guys to come in and see him, be able to show in person, talk to them about anything they wanted to talk about to help out his case.
Yeah, he's not alone, but he as soon as we kind of found out there was no pro day, he tweeted all that work for nothing.
Yeah, he knew it. He knew.
All right, now in Hey Kentucky, in case you missed it, a review of recent headlines. Mitch McConnell has led an effort by Senate Republicans to introduce a sweeping $1 trillion emergency aid package. It includes direct payments to Americans and loans for airlines and small businesses, doling out $1,200 recovery rebates for individuals and $2,400 for couples. Meanwhile, Georgetown's Toyota plant has extended next week's closure from 3 days to 10 days. The COVID-19 crisis prompted the company to suspend production at its auto and component plants in the U.S., Canada, and Mexico until April 6th. And leaders with Jefferson County Public Schools admit it's possible that the current break from classroom instruction could extend as far out as May 11th, based on guidance from the CDC. All right, up next on Hey Kentucky, a little flashback to life before the coronavirus overtook every headline. We'll bring you a report from a Lexington high school about their journalism program, shot before the world turned upside down. Stay with us.